Despite all of the negotiating and all of the claims that it wants peace, Russia is doing precisely what it has done for years in Ukraine, launching missiles and drones en masse to cause as much damage as possible. On Sunday, September 7th, Russia went too far. It hit Kyiv with its largest strike yet. Ukraine hasn't taken what Russia did lightly. This is payback, as Ukraine lights up Russia following the Kyiv bombing with a strike that was instant, brutal, and does even more damage to Vladimir Putin's war machine. September 7th marks one of the most terrifying days of the Russian invasion so far for Ukraine. Russia chose this day to launch what The Guardian calls the largest ever air attack on Ukraine, with the lowlight being Russia's drones managing to breach Ukraine's air defenses to strike several targets in Kyiv. The terrible bombardment of Ukraine's capital city saw Russia once again use its aerial might to target civilians rather than soldiers during a war that has already claimed the lives of 13,883 non-soldiers as of July 31st. Sadly, September 7th added to the ever-growing death tally. Russia's missiles and drones claimed the lives of at least 3 people on Sunday, 2 of them being a mother and a baby, The Guardian reports. At least 18 people have been injured, with several buildings being set on fire. Beyond Kyiv, Russia also struck the cities of Zaporizhia, Dnipro, Odessa, Kharkiv, and Kryvyi Rih, with the attack starting at 6:06 a.m. local time, a clear indicator that Russia wanted to hit civilians just as they were getting up to begin their mornings. Still, there's at least one target that Russia can claim is legitimate. As the Kyiv Post reported on September 7th, Russia's aerial assault managed to strike a government building in the heart of Kyiv, setting a fire at the seat of Ukraine's government for the first time since the war began. The outlet says that this marks the first time that Russia has targeted Ukraine's political hierarchy, as it struck a large government complex in the nation's capital. So far, no casualties have been announced among Ukraine's political parties, though it's possible that some politicians may be among the 18 injured. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky was quick to condemn Russia's latest strike. The Guardian reports him as saying that what Russia did was a deliberate crime and prolongation of the war, while adding that real diplomacy in the war that Putin started should have begun a long time ago. But it's always Russia that proves it has no interest in achieving a legitimate peace. If September 7th showed the world anything, it's that what Russia does and what Putin says he wants to achieve when it comes to peace are always two very different things. Now, Ukraine could have justifiably spent the rest of the weekend licking its collective wounds while formulating a response, but it didn't do that. Ukraine had a response waiting. Even before the fires had been put out in Kyiv, Ukraine took its revenge against Russia with a calculated and highly coordinated series of airstrikes that showcase the difference in approaches between the two nations. Russia, as it so often does, targeted civilians and cities. Ukraine's swift and brutal revenge saw it strike against the very heart of the Russian military-industrial complex, as it once again hit targets that it knows will contribute to bleeding Putin dry financially. Oil, infrastructure. 2 pieces of it, in fact. Brings us to the first of Ukraine's devastating revenge strikes. Within a couple of hours of the news breaking about Russia's terrible strike on Kyiv, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine took to Telegram to announce its multifaceted retaliation. First on the Ukrainian hit list was yet another of Russia's key oil refineries. Units of the Special Operations Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine also carried out an attack on the facilities of Ilsky oil refinery in the Krasnodar region of the Russian Federation, the General Staff announced in a Telegram post. It added that the strike had caused several explosions and a fire in the area of the Ilsky facility, though the full results of the attack are still being clarified at the time of creating this video. At the very least, we know that Ukraine's reports of causing fires are accurate. Hours before the General Staff's announcement, the Astra Telegram channel was already sharing images and videos showcasing the impact of Ukraine's aerial assault. One of the photographs merely shows smoke streaming into the sky, presumably from the direction of the Ilsky refinery. The videos, which include one seemingly recorded by a driver, show the facility in more detail, with the same smoke pouring out. Yet another video, which lasts for just seconds, shows nothing more than what seems to be a Ukrainian drone flying through the sky. We can only assume that this is the drone that did the damage at Ilsky. Astra's report featured a quote from the Russian response to Ukraine's strike. Let's see if you can spot the age-old Russian excuse for yet another fire at one of its facilities rear its head once again. In the Seversky district, UAV debris fell on the territory of the Ilsky oil refinery. As a result, one of the process units caught fire, the report says. The fire, covering several square meters, was quickly extinguished. There were no casualties. Fire and rescue teams, as well as special and emergency services, are working at the site. The refinery personnel were evacuated to shelters. So no casualties for Russia, as is often the case with Ukraine's strikes, seeing as Ukraine targets infrastructure and facilities rather than people. But you may have noticed the word debris in that statement. Once again, Russia is trying to create the impression that its almighty air defenses destroyed Ukraine's drones, only for pieces of those drones to somehow happen to land precisely on the target that Ukraine wanted to hit. The debris excuse is getting a little comical at this point. But what isn't comical, from Russia's perspective, is the damage Ukraine may have just done. The Ilsky oil refinery is described as both a modern manufacturing complex and one of the leading oil refineries in the southern federal district of Russia on the refinery's official website. It's perfectly positioned to make use of ports in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, meaning we can assume that oil from this refinery often finds its way into Crimea and perhaps even the eastern and southern regions of Ukraine. The refinery has the rather hilarious motto of "progress in harmony with nature." There will be no progress at Ilsky for a while. Ukraine's devastating revenge strike has just set fire to parts of a refinery that's responsible for processing up to 6.42 million tons of oil annually. Ukraine hasn't destroyed all of the sprawling facility, but they have created a fire, possibly damaging key parts of the facility's infrastructure that's responsible for creating the refined oil products such as gasoline and diesel that Russia's soldiers need to launch their assaults against Ukraine using mechanized units. Though the Kyiv report posts that Russia is claiming to have extinguished the fire that Ukraine caused, there's a good chance that part of the refinery is now down for the count until Russia is able to carry out repairs. When those repairs might happen isn't certain. After all, Ukraine has been hitting Russia's refineries regularly over the course of the last month, as we'll discuss later in the video. If it were just the Ilsky refinery that Ukraine hit as revenge for Russia's largest ever aerial assault, that might be enough. A precision strike against another refinery puts yet more pressure on a Russian oil industry that's already starting to feel the strain of a powerful Ukrainian deep strike strategy. But Ukraine wasn't done. Far from it. At around the same time as it struck Ilsky, Ukraine had its sights set on another target. In its Telegram report, the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces said that Ukraine's missile and artillery troops coordinated with the country's Unmanned Systems Force and several other groups to hit the Linear Production Dispatch Station, or LVDS-8N, which is located in Bryansk. LVDS-8N is part of the complex of the main oil pipeline, Steel Horse, the pumping capacity of which is 10.5 million tons, the General Staff reports. The facility is of strategic importance for ensuring the transportation of oil products for the Russian occupation army. Numerous hits were recorded, followed by a fire in the area of the pumping station and the tank farm. The Kyiv Post offers more information in its report on the Ukraine strike, revealing this isn't just any old LVDS that Ukraine just hit. It's part of the famous Druzhba oil pipeline that is responsible for transporting refined oil products from Belarus into Russia. This is a very smart strike by Ukraine. Its attacks on facilities like Ilsky see Ukraine take huge bites out of Russia's ability to create its own refined oil products. However, they don't stop Russia from buying these products from the gradually shrinking list of its allies who are willing to supply it. Belarus is right at the top of that list of allies, and striking the Druzhba pipeline means that Ukraine has gone some way toward taking Belarus's oil out of the Ukraine war equation. Ukraine knows how important this pipeline is to Russia. That's why it's hit the pipeline several times in the past. The most recent of these strikes, before September 7th, came on August 13th. Once again, Ukraine used its long-range kamikaze drones to attack a key part of the pipeline. This time it was the Unyetcha oil pumping station inside Bryansk, with Ukraine's attack leaving that station in flames. As we see with the refinery strikes, Ukraine isn't taking out the entire pipeline. Druzhba is far too big for that. Instead, it's hitting key points along the pipeline with precision strikes, forcing Russia to spend time and money on making repairs, all while the pipeline has to be temporarily shut down. While the pipeline's links to Belarus are obviously important, Ukraine may have had another reason for hitting Druzhba. Beyond supplying Russia from Belarus, the pipeline also allows Belarus and Russia to supply several Eastern European countries with oil, namely Slovakia and Hungary. That supply has continued throughout the Ukraine war in what many see as an interesting piece of hypocrisy from some European countries. Both Hungary and Slovakia have ties to Russia, with the former maintaining diplomatic relations and a hefty amount of trade with Russia, while the latter has suspended official military assistance to Ukraine and levied criticism against the European Union or EU for the harshness of its sanctions. Ironically, it was the EU that spared Druzhba from its initial flurry of bans on Russian oil during the first months of Putin's invasion. Back in May 2022, Euronews reported that Hungary had played a huge role in ensuring the pipeline stayed open, getting its way after 4 weeks of tense negotiations. The EU ended up focusing almost solely on Russia's seaborne oil exports, allowing the Druzhba pipeline to continue supplying landlocked European countries. To Ukraine, this exemption lasted for far too long. It's only during the last few months that the EU has come up with a plan for a complete EU exit from Russian oil. And even that will take until 2028 to complete. Ukraine knows that Druzhba has been a problem for a long time and is tired of waiting for Europe to do anything about it. So it's targeting the pipeline with its drones, and it's making a few countries angry by doing so. On August 22nd, the Moscow Times reported that both Hungary and Slovakia had demanded that Ukraine cease all of its strikes on the Druzhba pipeline. The foreign ministries of the two countries even released a joint statement to make their admonishment official. Within just 9 days, the Druzhba oil pipeline, which supplies oil to Hungary and subsequently Slovakia, has suffered its third incident of damage, the statement read. We call on the European Commission to immediately ensure that commitments to safeguard the energy security of EU member states are upheld. Ukraine doesn't care about these types of statements. It's just added a fourth to the list, and it will argue that the energy security of a couple of countries that are a little too cozy with Putin means little to it when that same pipeline allows Russia to generate money that it needs to keep the war effort going. Ukraine is taking sanctions into its own hands with its long-range drone strikes, and you can learn more about how and the impact these strikes are having on Russia in our video. So Ukraine's revenge involved taking out 2 big oil-related targets in the course of one night. The message is clear. If Russia hits Kyiv, Ukraine will hit Russian oil. But that's not all that Ukraine pulled off during its September 7th airstrikes. Ensuring Russia had no time to toast the so-called success of killing yet more Ukrainian civilians and landing a direct hit on a government building, Ukraine also hit Kursk. You may remember Kursk. In August 2024, Ukraine launched a counter-invasion into this Russian border oblast that saw it become the first country to take Russian territory since the end of World War II. Russia eventually pushed Ukraine out of Kursk, mostly, but the region has been a consistent target for Ukraine ever since. On September 7th, Ukraine hit it again. In addition, successful hits on the locations of the occupants, personnel and logistics warehouses of the Russian military units in the Kursk region of the Russian Federation have been confirmed, the General Staff's Telegram post said, noting that as with the refinery strike, the results of the fire damage caused by these drone attacks are still being confirmed. Perhaps the extent of the damage is secondary to the targets that Ukraine took out. Supply depots in Kursk are likely being used to provide Russia's troops in the Sumy Oblast with what they need to carry out assaults there. Take out the supply depots, along with the personnel facilities, and Ukraine weakens Russia's assaults on its own territory. Ukraine's revenge was complete, and Russia's oil facilities suffered. We mentioned earlier in the video that we'd come back to Ukraine's constant strikes against Russia's oil refining capacity. Though Russia's refineries have been a target for Ukraine ever since it started conducting deep strikes back in 2024, August has seen it ramp up these strikes to an astounding degree. Ilsky was far from the first, and it won't be the last refinery that Ukraine hits. There has been an entire wave, with these strikes having devastating consequences for Russia's refined oil industry. On August 26th, United 24 Media published a report on Ukraine's August refinery strikes up to that point, noting that they'd impacted at least 17% of Russia's refining capacity. As with Ilsky, Ukraine isn't destroying entire refineries. Its long-range drones, as impressive as they are, simply don't pack the firepower needed to do that. But what Ukraine is doing, again and again, is hitting key parts of the refineries that need to be repaired before Russia can get those refineries up and running again. It's the repairs that are causing Russia so many problems. As the New Voice of Ukraine reported in July, Russia was already struggling to repair its oil refineries thanks to Western sanctions making it more difficult to purchase the parts needed for those repairs. Scheduled maintenance, which Russia's refinery owners have to conduct annually, is now being combined with unexpected repairs needed due to Ukraine's strikes to create a massive backlog. Ukraine doesn't need to destroy entire refineries. It just has to keep forcing Russia to shut those refineries down with enough damage to force repairs that Russia is finding increasingly difficult to make. By the end of August, TradingView reported that Russia's total offline oil refining capacity stood at 6.4 million tons, which represents a 65% increase over earlier projections based on predefined maintenance schedules. That's the point of Ukraine's drone strikes. They force Russia to deal with repairs it otherwise wouldn't have to make. The impact is being felt inside Russia, just as much as being felt by the Russian troops who aren't getting the fuel they need. As those troops are forced to launch assaults minus the mechanized equipment they'd otherwise be using, Russian civilians are being faced with severe supply and demand problems. As Politico reported on September 2nd, there are now massive lines for gasoline in many of Russia's oblasts, all because the refineries aren't able to supply gas stations with the fuel they need to sell to the average Russian. Prices have also skyrocketed, and they may be higher than Russia is claiming. That's according to the lead analyst of Ukraine's National Interests Protection Network, Ilya Nesadovsky. There is not enough gasoline in Karelia. There is not enough gasoline in the Khabarovsk territory. There is not enough gasoline in the Far East. There is not enough gasoline in Primorsky Krai, Nesadodsky tells Politico. If we look at the price tags, the price is somewhere around 20-25% more than the official statistics give. So these are real losses for Russians and for carriers. Ukraine's revenge for the Kyiv strike exacerbates all of these problems. You can also bet that Ilsky won't be the last refinery that Ukraine hits. It's established an effective strategy, and the impact is clear for everybody in Russia to see. It's cause and effect at its most brutal. Ukraine hits refineries. Russia's people, including the thousands of soldiers who are dying on the front lines every month, feel the impact. And worse may be coming for Russia. Frustrated with the fact that Putin's decision to bomb Kyiv with the largest airstrike of the Ukraine war so far represents yet another example of Russia's leaders saying and doing very different things. US President Donald Trump says that he's ready to take action, as according to Reuters, which reported on comments Trump made following Russia's Kyiv attack. When quizzed by a reporter whether this attack now means that he's ready to move on to the second phase of sanctions against Russia, Trump offered a simple response: "Yeah, I am." No other details were provided, though it seems likely this second phase of sanctions will see the US punish countries that are buying Russian oil with new tariffs. That's what he did to India, with Trump saying days before Russia's strike on Kyiv that the effect of those tariffs were already being felt. "That cost hundreds of billions of dollars to Russia," Trump said. "You call that no action? And I haven't done phase 2 yet, or phase 3. It's looking like phase 2 is coming." What that means for Russia, especially with Ukraine showing itself to be so capable of scoring direct hits on Russia's oil refineries already, remains to be seen. What doesn't remain to be seen is that Ukraine has another new weapon it can use to cause far more damage to Russia's refineries than ever before. The Flamingo is ready to take flight, and it may just be the most devastating missile in Ukraine's arsenal. Find out how Ukraine's new Flamingo missile will send Russia back to the Stone Age in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of the latest developments in the Ukraine war.